I moved into Oakridge Estates because it was supposed to be peaceful. The neighborhood brochure boasted tree-lined streets, friendly neighbors, and a pristine HOA that maintains community standards. But within weeks of moving into my modest, two-story home at the edge of the subdivision, I realized maintaining community standards was just a polite way of saying, "We control everything you do." They'd fined me for painting my mailbox the wrong shade of brown. They'd sent warning letters for leaving my trash can out a few hours late. I'd swallowed every petty insult because I didn't want trouble. But nothing prepared me for what happened one October morning when I stepped outside and saw a raw, jagged trench being carved right along my property line. At first, I thought maybe a utility company had made a mistake. There were orange flags in the grass, a backhoe parked by the curb, and two men in neon vests leaning on shovels. The trench was deep, 3 feet down at least, and stretched almost the entire length of my yard. My dog barked frantically at the sight of the exposed earth, and my stomach tightened. This wasn't a small landscaping job. This was deliberate. I called out to the men, but they just exchanged a glance and looked away. When I pressed for an explanation, one finally muttered, "Just following orders, ma'am," before going back to digging. By afternoon, the trench had wrapped around my side yard like a moat. Clumps of dirt were piled high, the kind of heavy clay that's a nightmare to move. It was so close to my driveway that my tires scraped the edge when I backed out. Furious, I called the HOA office. The line rang 6 times before a crisp female voice answered. "Oakridge Estates Homeowners Association," she said sweetly. "How may I help you?" I gave her my address and demanded to know why workers were digging around my home. She sighed. "According to our records, you're in violation of Section 14B, improper drainage. The board has authorized the installation of a community drainage channel." I blinked. Improper drainage? What does that even mean? "You can't just dig up my yard." "Ma'am, this is for the good of the community." "You were notified." I racked my memory. No notice, no email, no letter, nothing. "I wasn't notified," I snapped. "And you don't have my permission to touch my property." She chuckled lightly, as though I was a child throwing a tantrum. "It's technically common ground. We're within our rights." That night, after the workers left, I walked the length of the trench with my flashlight. My yard looked like a war zone. My rose bushes had been ripped out. My sprinkler heads snapped like brittle bones. My dog whined as he peered into the dirt gash. I felt helpless and humiliated. But as I stood there, one thought began to form. If they were so sure of their rights, then why hadn't they left any paperwork? I decided right then I wasn't going to let them get away with it. A few months earlier, after a rash of petty thefts in the neighborhood, I'd installed a network of security cameras. 4 at the corners of the house, 2 above the garage, and 1 hidden in the birdhouse near the back fence. They recorded everything in high definition, 24/7. At first, they'd just been for peace of mind. Now they might become my only weapon. I spent the next 2 hours combing through footage. The cameras had caught the workers arriving before dawn, unloading equipment and rolling a backhoe onto my lawn. More importantly, I could clearly see the HOA president herself, Karen Murdoch, a tall, pinched woman with an iron-gray bob, pointing at my property line and giving instructions. She'd even brought coffee for the crew. Seeing her face on that screen ignited something inside me. This wasn't a mistake. This was personal. Ever since I refused to join her pet project, the Beautification Committee, she'd been needling me with fines and citations. Now she'd escalated to vandalism under the guise of community improvement. I backed up the footage onto 2 drives and sent copies to my email just in case. As the hours ticked past midnight, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the dark trench outside. I didn't know exactly what my next move would be, but one thing was clear. They'd underestimated me. The following morning, I woke to find even more damage. The trench now completely encircled the back of my property, cutting off my vegetable garden and uprooting my fence posts. My dog nearly fell in when he ran out to the yard. Furious, I took pictures from every angle. That's when my neighbor, Tom, ambled over. He lived 2 houses down and had always been friendly but cautious. "They're at it again, huh?" he said, peering at the mess. "Yeah," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Do you know anything about this drainage project?" He hesitated. All I know is Karen's been talking about making an example out of somebody. Said people need to learn respect for the rules. I felt my stomach drop. And that somebody is me. He gave a small shrug like he wished he could say more but didn't want to get involved. I couldn't blame him. The HOA had power. They could fine Sue, even put a lien on your house. But as Tom walked back to his porch, I realized I had something Karen didn't. Proof. That night I adjusted my cameras, making sure every angle of the trench was visible. If they were going to keep digging, they'd do it under the unblinking eye of my surveillance. I set up a motion-activated alert on my phone. Any time someone stepped onto my property, I'd know instantly. I barely slept. Images of Karen's smug face haunted me. By dawn, my phone buzzed with an alert. I opened the feed to see 2 workers rolling in a load of concrete pipes. This wasn't just a trench. They were building a drainage system. A permanent scar across my yard. I called the police. The dispatcher listened politely, but said it sounded like a civil matter. We can send an officer to make a report, she offered. But if it's HOA property, our hands may be tied. Fine, if the police wouldn't stop them, I'd go higher. I called a lawyer friend, Mark, and explained the situation. He whistled. Sounds like trespass and destruction of property, he said. Send me everything you've got. Pictures, video, letters. As I emailed him the files, a grim satisfaction settled over me. The HOA thought they could bully me into submission. They didn't know I had hours of footage showing their president directing unauthorized work on my land. They didn't know I was ready to fight back. I stepped outside, camera in hand, and filmed the workers as they glared at me. Smile for the cameras, I said coolly. This is all evidence now. One of them muttered under his breath, You're gonna regret this. But as I looked at the trench snaking around my home like a wound, I knew the only people who'd regret this would be the HOA. The next morning, the HOA crew returned earlier than expected. I had already been awake for hours, reviewing my camera angles one more time, ensuring every inch of my yard and the trench was visible. I could see the workers unloading equipment in the dim morning light, unaware that every movement was being recorded. I felt a surge of calm. Finally, I had the upper hand. I made my way to the front yard, phone in hand, streaming the live feed to my lawyer. Mark, I want you watching this in real time, I said, keeping my voice steady. He leaned back in his chair, eyebrows raised. Wow, this is blatant. We might be able to stop them mid-operation and file for damages immediately. I nodded. They're trespassing, destroying my property, and I have clear evidence. Karen has gone too far this time. As the workers started shoveling again, I noticed something strange. Karen herself was there, clipboard in hand, pacing like a general surveying the battlefield. Her lips were pressed together in that rigid line she always used when she wanted to appear unshakable. But her eyes flicked nervously toward my house several times, as if she suspected I was watching. I stepped onto my porch and waved casually, pretending to talk on my phone. Beautiful morning for landscaping, isn't it? I called out. The men froze mid-dig and Karen's head snapped up. I could almost see the gears turning in her mind. What are you doing? She shouted. Get off my property! Your HOA doesn't own my land, I said firmly, motioning toward the cameras. And everything you're doing is being recorded. Every step, every order you give. Karen's face went pale. She snapped her clipboard closed and motioned for the men to continue digging. But something had changed. The confident swagger from yesterday was gone. I could see her second-guessing herself, glancing at the cameras, realizing I wasn't bluffing. I went back inside and opened the email with the footage already attached to Mark. Send this to the county inspector and file a formal complaint, he said. This is beyond anything minor. They're breaking the law. Meanwhile, the trench had grown deeper and more hazardous. I started placing small cones and signs warning, Caution, deep trench, partly to protect the neighborhood from injury and partly to force accountability. One of the workers muttered under his breath, She's insane. I smiled grimly. Insane? No, determined. By late morning, a few neighbors had gathered to watch. Some whispered among themselves about Karen and her tyrannical ways. One elderly woman approached cautiously. I've seen her pull this before, she said quietly. She picks on the wrong house and expects everyone else to be scared. But you've got proof. Her words bolstered my resolve. It wasn't just about me anymore. If I stayed silent, Karen would continue to terrorize anyone who didn't submit to her whims. At noon, a county inspector arrived, clipboard in hand. Karen tried to intercept him at the curb, but I stepped forward holding my phone like a shield. "Everything you need is right here," I said. I played the footage from the cameras, showing Karen directing the excavation without permits, the workers ripping up my fence and garden, and even one of the pipes being shoved recklessly against my front porch. The inspector's eyes widened. "Ma'am, this is serious. Unauthorized construction on private property is a violation. We'll need to stop this immediately and issue a notice of violation to the HOA." Karen opened her mouth, but the inspector cut her off. "No excuses. You need to halt all work until proper permits are issued." The workers paused mid-shovel, looking confused and anxious. Karen glared at me, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped her clipboard. Her composure had finally cracked. "This isn't over," she hissed. "It's over when the law says it's over," I replied, standing taller than I had all week. Once the inspector left, I called Mark again. "You should come by. I want to discuss damages and legal steps," I said. He agreed and promised to review the HOA bylaws carefully. That evening I watched the footage again, this time noting small details. The workers' hesitant glances at the cameras, Karen muttering under her breath, the backhoe nearly tipping when a pipe was mishandled. I realized how reckless they had been and how easily it could have led to injury or worse. The next morning I got a message from the HOA board. "Cease and desist all harassment. You're in violation of community decorum." I laughed bitterly. Harassment? They were the ones trespassing and destroying property. I forwarded the message to Mark. Then came the real turning point. I received a call from a local news station. Someone must have tipped them off. The reporter wanted footage of the trench and the HOA scandal. I sent them the clips, emphasizing Karen's instructions and the damage caused. Within hours, the story was live online, showing a top-down view of my home encircled by the trench, with captions highlighting the unauthorized actions of the HOA president. Social media exploded. Neighbors commented, sharing their own stories of petty fines and intimidation. Some even expressed outrage that the HOA had overstepped its authority so dramatically. Karen became a trending topic in the local community forum, with posts dissecting her every move from the footage. A few days later, Mark came over with a stack of papers. "We can file a civil suit for trespass, destruction of property, and intentional infliction of emotional distress," he said. "And with the footage, you have a slam-dunk case. They might try to settle quietly, but public pressure is on your side." I felt a mix of satisfaction and relief. For weeks I'd felt powerless, watching my home being carved up, my garden destroyed, and my privacy violated. But now the tables had turned. The same cameras that had recorded my frustration and helplessness were now my shield and my sword. By the end of the week, the trench had been partially filled back in under the county inspector's supervision. My garden slowly returned to life, though the memory of those jagged lines in the earth remained etched in my mind. Karen and the HOA had been forced into a corner, facing both legal action and public scrutiny. Standing on my porch one evening, watching the sunset, I realized something profound. I hadn't just protected my property, I'd protected my dignity and, indirectly, the rights of every neighbor who had been too afraid to speak up. The trench might have been an attempt to intimidate me, but it had exposed the HOA's overreach instead. And as I looked at the last clips from my cameras, showing Karen's flustered face and the hesitant workers, I couldn't help but smile. The watchers had become the watched, and the power balance had shifted in my favor. The fight wasn't over, but now I knew I had the tools, the evidence, and the resolve to see it through. Karen might have thought she could dig her way into control, but in reality, she had dug herself a hole from which she might never climb out.